I never thought that Sunday dinner, roast beef, mashed potatoes, family murmurs, and clinking glasses would end with my son raising a toast that sliced my chest open. "To Greg," Ryan said, lifting his wine glass, "more of a father to me than my own ever was. My future kids will only know him as Grandpa." The room froze. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the kind of silence that swallows a man whole. I looked at Ryan, my son, my only son, and for half a second I wondered if this was some elaborate joke, some poor attempt at sentiment that came out wrong. But then I saw it. The certainty in his eyes, the approval-seeking glance he tossed toward Greg seated next to him with that practiced grin, the same one that had wormed its way into every part of my son's life over the past year. I set down my fork. "Perfect," I said. My voice was calm, steady. I hadn't even stood up yet. "Then he can start paying your bills." That did it. The blood drained from Ryan's face like someone had cut a wire. You'd think I'd screamed or flipped the table. But no. All it took was truth. Murmurs rippled. Greg's smile faltered for a moment, just enough to reveal the man behind the teeth. My daughter-in-law squirmed in her seat. No one dared make eye contact. Even the dog slunk under the table. I excused myself before dessert, didn't raise my voice, didn't throw a fit. Just walked down the hallway past the framed family photos. Ryan in his graduation gown, Ryan holding up a trophy, Ryan with me in the garage when he was 10, holding his first wrench. By the time I got to the study, the photos didn't feel like mine anymore. They were pieces of a version of my life someone else had rewritten while I wasn't looking. Greg, more of a father than I ever was? I closed the study door behind me, quietly. I didn't want to see their faces when they realized I wasn't coming back out. Let them finish the pie. Let Greg give the toast again if he wants. Let them all sit there in the house I'd built with my own hands, chewing on laughter that suddenly didn't taste so sweet. Because something shifted inside me at that table. Something final. 3 weeks earlier, I was under the hood of my old '91 Ford, coaxing a stubborn radiator hose into place, when Ryan showed up unannounced. He had 2 bags of groceries, and that same boyish grin he used to wear when he brought home a good report card. "Brought steaks," he said. "Thought we could grill." I wiped the grease from my hands and gave a nod. He didn't visit much these days. Not alone. "I got the promotion," he said, setting the bags down on the workbench like it was some kind of ceremony. Greg helped me land it, said my pitch finally had teeth. I should have felt proud. My son, moving up. But something about the way he said "owe him big time" made my chest tighten. We ate on the porch, and he talked more in that hour than he had in months. Greg this, Greg that. Apparently, the man had a strategy for everything. Career coaching, investment advice, even marriage alignment exercises, whatever that means. "He's like a mentor," Ryan said. Eyes glowing in that way you only get when someone's handing you a shortcut to everything you've ever wanted. I nodded along, but every word chipped at something. Not because of Greg. I didn't even know the guy then. It was the look on Ryan's face. Like someone had finally given him a map, and it didn't have me on it. After he left, I stayed out on the porch, listened to the crickets tuning up for the night, tried to shake the feeling that I'd been replaced. It didn't stick at the time. I told myself I was overthinking it. But in hindsight, that visit was the first domino. The warm-up act before the betrayal. He didn't come over to reconnect. He came to tell me, in his way, that Greg had arrived, and that the man was now speaking into all the places I used to fill: advice, direction, purpose. I just didn't realize yet how deep the roots had gone. Greg had been orbiting us for months, always just outside the frame. First, it was little things. Offering to guide Ryan through his mortgage refinance, helping them plan their daughter's birthday party, recommending his network for investment opportunities. It all sounded harmless until you looked closer and saw whose hand was steering the wheel. Ryan didn't used to talk like this. Now every sentence was a pitch. Greg says, Greg thinks. Greg's been through this before. At first I brushed it off. Influence comes and goes. You hope your kid grows out of it, but the signs kept stacking up. Last Thanksgiving, Greg hosted. I wasn't even asked to bring the turkey, just a store-bought pie, if I had time. Greg gave a toast back then, too. Thanked everyone for coming into his home. Ryan raised his glass like it was gospel. I told myself not to read into it. A month later, Ryan told me he was moving closer to Madison's parents, so the kids can grow up near family. Family. That word hung heavy in the air like smoke from a grease fire. I started to see the pattern. Greg didn't just want to support Ryan, he wanted to replace me. Piece by piece. Presence by presence. He wrapped himself in mentorship, in guidance, in good intentions, and my son handed over the keys without asking where the car was going. But that toast, that night at the dinner table, that was the final straw. More of a father than my own ever was. He didn't stutter, didn't pause. He said it like a truth he'd rehearsed, like a verdict passed down. And there was Greg, nodding, like the king being crowned. I'd given Ryan decades of my life, my time, my tools, my weekends, my savings. I held the flashlight when he learned to change brake pads. I paced the floor the night before his SATs. I picked up his first dropped call when he found out Madison was pregnant. None of it made it into the toast. That night I knew one thing. This wasn't about hurt feelings. It was about truth. Greg had crossed a line. But Ryan? Ryan had drawn it for him. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry that had passed. What settled in was colder than that. Quiet, focused, permanent. After they left, Greg all handshakes and charm, Ryan not meeting my eyes. I sat in my study with the door closed and the lights low. I didn't need the house to feel full. I needed it to feel like mine again. Behind the bookshelf, behind a panel I installed myself when Caroline was still alive, sat a small fireproof box. Combination lock. Old school. The kind banks don't even recommend anymore, because no one bothers with paper. I do. Inside were the things I don't talk about. Original deed to the house, paid off 15 years ago. Backup bank statements from every savings account I've kept open. Photocopies of birth certificates, Ryan's included. And at the bottom, in a sealed envelope marked, Future Only, the documentation for the trust fund I'd built for Ryan's kids, my grandkids. I'd started it the week the first one was born, quietly. Monthly contributions, nothing flashy, but consistent. By now, it could put 2 kids through college and still have meat on the bone. Ryan didn't know that. I wanted it to be a surprise one day. A good one. Something from Grandpa that meant something. Now I was looking at it like evidence. I'd built a life you couldn't just flatter your way into. One that didn't live in the spotlight, or at the end of a wine glass during a phony toast. One that stayed tucked behind a wall until it was needed. And it was needed now. Because Greg could play father all he wanted. He could host dinners and play mentor and drop hints about legacy. But he couldn't take what he couldn't find. And I'd made damn sure the important things, the real power, were locked up tight, with my name signed at the bottom. I looked at that envelope and made a decision. If Ryan wanted to hand my legacy to another man, then I'd make sure that man never got near the things that mattered most. Greg could have the spotlight. I was holding the controls. Monday morning, I made the call before the coffee finished brewing. Ingrid Denton picked up on the second ring. "You finally need me for more than your taxes?" she asked. Her voice was sharp, dry, and deeply familiar. The kind of person who never asked how you were unless she planned to do something about it. "I need locks changed," I said. "But not on doors. On paper." That got her attention. She had been my attorney and financial advisor for over 20 years. Helped me wind down the business after Caroline passed. Structured the original education trust. Even rewrote my will after Ryan got married. Something she'd side-eyed at the time but didn't challenge. Now I needed more than side-eyes. I needed her in full battle mode. I drove straight to her office. She didn't offer coffee or pleasantries. Just waved me in and pulled out a legal pad. Start talking. I laid it out. The toast. The pattern. The feeling in my gut that Greg wasn't just overstepping. He was maneuvering, sliding into financial decisions, earning trust. Yes, but more than that, positioning himself. When I mentioned the trust, she stopped writing. Does Ryan have access? He has a power of attorney I signed a few years back, when I was in the hospital after the valve scare. Her eyes narrowed. And you didn't revoke it after? I didn't think I needed to. He was my son. She didn't say anything. Just turned to her computer and started typing like the keyboard owed her money. We're locking down everything, she said. Immediate freeze on trust disbursements. I want full transaction history for the last year. We'll check every dollar. I nodded. And Greg? If he's been dipping into your estate, we'll catch it. If he's manipulating Ryan, we can't fix stupidity, but we can sure as hell wall it off. She paused and looked at me over the rim of her glasses. You want scorched earth? No, I said, not yet. But I want to make damn sure I'm not the one getting burned. She cracked the smallest smile. Good. Let's get to work. I stood outside Ingrid's office after our meeting, watching traffic crawl down Main Street, and I said it out loud, just to hear the words. I'm not losing this quietly. Because that's what they were banking on. Ryan, Greg, all of them. That I'd do what I'd always done. Smile politely, say nothing, write the check, and leave the room before it got uncomfortable. Not this time. I had 3 goals. Simple. Clean. First, protect the trust. Not just for legality's sake, but because that's the last part of me I haven't given away yet. That money was built from years of grit. Weekends I skipped rest. Jobs I took that wore my bones down so my grandkids could have choices. That legacy isn't Greg's to touch. Hell, it's barely Ryan's to touch anymore. Second, expose Greg. Not with gossip or finger-pointing, but with documents, with numbers, with facts that don't care how charming your voice sounds or how confident your handshake is. Greg's a smooth operator, probably believes his own lies. But somewhere in the last few months, he crossed from influence to interference, and I plan to catch him mid-step. Third, and maybe the hardest, make Ryan see it. Really see it. Not the surface story Greg's been feeding him, but the actual cost of what he's allowing. If he wants to hand his kids' future over to a man who didn't raise him, fine. But he's going to do it with eyes wide open and my voice in his ear. Because I'm not done being a father just because he stopped acting like a son. I started writing it down that night. Everything. Dates, conversations, transfers I remembered authorizing. Everything I could piece together. It wasn't about revenge. It was about taking the wheel back before they drove the whole damn legacy into a ditch. Ingrid called later that evening. Found something odd, she said. There's a payment from your joint utility account. Not huge, but weird. Want me to pull the thread? Always, I said. She chuckled. That's the version of you I like best. So be it. I'd spent too long watching from the porch. It was time to step back onto the blueprint of my own life. Ingrid didn't take long. By Tuesday morning, she was on the line before my second cup of coffee. There's an $8,000 transfer from the account Ryan uses to pay your household bills, she said, voice clipped and clean. It went to something called Cedar Integrated Solutions. I stared out the kitchen window at the backyard, the same patch of grass where Ryan used to chase fireflies in July. Never heard of it. I figured. Want to know what it is? Hit me. It's listed as a consulting firm. Financial Growth and Development. Sound familiar? My gut tightened. Greg? She didn't answer directly, just said, "The registered owner is Gregory Danner." The name landed like a dropped wrench. That was the first breadcrumb. Did Ryan know where the money went? Ingrid sighed. That's the next question, isn't it? If he authorized it knowingly, we've got a problem. If he didn't, we've got a different kind of problem. I didn't say anything for a moment. Just rubbed the back of my neck, the skin there hot, with that deep, slow-building fury that doesn't make a sound. It just waits. $8,000. Not from his own wallet. From mine. From the account I'd kept open so the utilities would always be paid, even if I was out of town or in a hospital bed. A simple trust system. No frills, no questions. Just a safety net. And Greg had sunk his fingers into it. I asked Ingrid to send me the address on file for Cedar Integrated Solutions. It's a co-working space in the next city over, she said. I called. He rents a desk. That's all. A desk? Yep. Probably shares it with 10 other schemers chasing their next sucker. I didn't laugh. There was nothing funny about it. Greg hadn't just taken my son's trust. He'd started reaching into my accounts. The man was planting flags on my land before I'd even realized there was a war. And Ryan, either he was helping him do it, or he was too blind to see the shovel in Greg's hands. Didn't matter. Now I had a name, I had a trail, and I was damn sure going to follow it. Wednesday morning, I drove to the address Ingrid had pulled. Cedar Integrated Solutions. Big name, small footprint. Just a shared office suite tucked between a juice bar and a dog spa. The kind of place that looks modern until you read the tenant list and realize it's full of half-baked startups and lifestyle coaches with nothing but ring lights and LinkedIn profiles. I stepped inside. Receptionist barely glanced up. "You here for a booking?" "No, just wondering if Greg Danner's in today." She raised an eyebrow, then scrolled her mouse. "He rents desk 14. Doesn't work here full-time, just books it when he needs to meet people." That told me everything. A chameleon, not a builder. "Do you have any of his materials? Brochures? Cards?" She handed me a glossy pamphlet from a side rack, bright lettering over a dark background. Cedar Integrated Solutions, Wealth Elevation Through Modern Mentorship. I didn't have to read far to catch the tone. Buzzwords. No credentials. Just vague promises and vision statements about legacy growth and financial alignment. It reeked of pyramid speak, empty ambition dressed in bullet points. Inside was a section labeled Our Visionaries. And there was Greg, arms crossed, smiling like a politician. No mention of formal training. Just dealt with real estate portfolios for over a decade, which could mean anything, including subletting his ex's apartment. I tucked the brochure in my coat. On the way out, I walked past desk 14. Nothing special. A faux wood surface, a monitor stand, and a business card holder with only 3 cards left. I took one. Back in the truck, I flipped it over. On the back, in Greg's handwriting, was a scribbled reminder. Ryan. Follow-up trust paperwork. My fingers tightened on the wheel. This wasn't just influence. This wasn't casual advice. Greg was burrowing into the very thing I'd built for the next generation. The part of me that used to run a construction site stirred awake. That clarity, that precision. He was using Ryan, maybe even grooming him, positioning himself not just as advisor, but gatekeeper. Well, if he wanted to play legacy games, he just knocked on the wrong door. That night, Ryan called. Not a check-in. Not even a, "Hey, Dad." Just launched right in. "Greg said you stopped by his office?" Office. Like it was some firm on the 18th floor of a financial tower. Not a borrowed desk beside a smoothie machine. "You checking up on him?" Ryan's voice had an edge. Tight. Defensive. Not his own. "He says you were asking questions." I was. I said, plain and steady, about why 8 grand from my account went to a man I didn't authorize. He went quiet, but not long enough to think. He's helping me build something, Ryan snapped. You don't get it. I get it just fine, I said. You're letting a man with a brochure and a buzzword vocabulary play with money that isn't his or yours. He scoffed, low and bitter. You've never trusted me to handle things. Never let me step out from under you. That one hit different. Not because it was true, but because I'd heard it before. From him when he was 15 and wanted to blow his savings on a motorcycle. From Madison when she said I was inserting myself by offering to help with daycare. And now, straight from Greg's playbook, handed down like a script. Ryan, I said carefully, I'm not trying to control your life. I'm trying to stop someone else from hijacking it. I don't need your protection. You think Greg's offering mentorship? He's cashing checks. Mine, and maybe soon your kids. You're blowing this out of proportion. That told me everything. He was in deep, not just financially, emotionally. Greg had wrapped himself in Ryan's insecurities, worn them like armor, turned every warning into an attack. I didn't finish the call. Didn't say goodbye. Just let the silence stretch, and then hung up, slow and deliberate. If Greg wanted to play this like a war, he'd just made a mistake. You don't threaten a man's future and expect him to sit still. You sure as hell don't steal from his past and expect forgiveness. Ryan might have been blind, but I wasn't. And Greg had just told me exactly where to aim. By Thursday morning, Ingrid had a file waiting for me. Printed, stapled, color-coded. She didn't waste time with small talk. You ready to feel sick? I nodded. She opened the folder and started pointing. First one's a $2,000 check, made out to Greg Danner. Memo line says, consulting fee. From where? She tapped the header. The Education Trust. My stomach dropped. He was paid directly from the grandkids' fund? I asked. Yes. And it gets worse. She flipped the page. Greg was added as co-trustee 6 months ago. I blinked. No, that's not possible. She handed me a photocopy of the filing. Ryan submitted it himself, used a power of attorney dated 2 years back, while you were in recovery from your heart procedure. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the paper like it might apologize if I looked hard enough. That power of attorney. I'd signed it because Ryan needed to manage some home repairs. Short-term. Practical. He said it was just so the contractors wouldn't bother me with calls while I was stuck in bed. I should have revoked it. Greg hadn't just advised Ryan. He'd seen a legal crack in the wall and widened it with a crowbar. A co-trustee has access, authority, and a say in disbursement decisions, all cloaked in legitimacy. No need to steal when you're allowed to sign. How did we miss this? I asked. You weren't watching, Ingrid said. Not cruelly, just the truth. I closed the folder. My hands were steady now. No anger left to burn. Just a clear line in my mind. From that hospital bed to that Sunday toast. It was all a build-up. Greg had been planning this. Not recklessly, strategically, step by step. First influence, then access, then control. And Ryan had handed him the pen. Ingrid leaned forward. We can unwind it. Revoke the POA. Restructure the trust. But you'll need to move fast. Before they try to liquidate anything else. They won't get that far, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Because I'm going to put Greg in a room, I said. And I'm going to make him explain, in front of witnesses, what kind of man calls himself a mentor, while cashing in a child's future. And for the first time since this started, I smiled. That night I sat alone in the garage, the one place Greg's shadow hadn't touched, yet. The air smelled like old wood and oil, things I could still understand. I stared at the rusted toolbox I'd had since I was 23. The top drawer still stuck halfway if you didn't lift it just right. Ingrid's folders sat on the workbench beside Maria's photo. The same one from the lake, her hair caught in the wind. She'd kept this place sacred. Said every man needed a room where no one could lie to him. And here it was, all laid out. Greg wasn't just manipulating Ryan. He was engineering a hostile takeover. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened, the power of attorney, the trust disbursements, the co-trustee status. This wasn't influence anymore. This was infiltration. He'd walked into my family with a smile and a title, and one by one, rewired the locks on everything I'd built. And Ryan, he hadn't even noticed. Maybe he didn't want to. Maybe being flattered felt better than being fathered. That was the part that hit hardest. Not the money, not the deception, but how easily Greg had erased me. How quickly my name had been crossed off the chalkboard. The man Ryan toasted, more of a father than mine ever was, wasn't just playing a role. He was replacing me on paper too, in legacy, in position, in authority. And if I hadn't checked, if I hadn't gone looking, by next year, I'd be a footnote. The old man who used to run things, the one who meant well but couldn't keep up. I gripped the edge of the bench. My knuckles ached. The photo of Maria didn't blink, but I felt her eyes anyway. I whispered to the empty room, "They think I'm finished." And then I laughed once, sharp and short. Greg had made one fatal mistake. He thought quiet meant weak. He thought patience meant absence. But I hadn't gone anywhere. And now I wasn't just going to stop him. I was going to make sure the next time he smiled at someone else's table, his own name left a bitter taste. I stayed in the garage long after the sun went down. The air got colder. I didn't bother with the heater. Felt right somehow. Like the house was mourning something I hadn't fully named. Maria's photo stayed in front of me. The frame's corner was chipped. A clumsy move years ago during a storm cleanup. She'd laughed and said, "Now it's got character." I reached for it, my fingers resting gently on the glass. "Did we raise him wrong?" I asked, soft. I wasn't looking for answers, just needed to say it out loud, into the space where honesty still echoed. It's easy to list what you gave your kids, time, shelter, tuition, safety, but it's harder to measure what you didn't give. The small absences, the times I came home late from a job site, the birthday dinners I turned into lessons about responsibility. I thought I was preparing him for the world. I never imagined he'd invite it in to replace me. The shame crept in slow, not loud, just a quiet ache, like finding out a house you built has a leak you never saw coming, and the mold's already set behind the walls. Ryan wasn't a villain. That was the hard part. He was still my son, but he'd become a man who could look me in the eye while stealing from his own kids' future. A man who called it help when Greg reached into their legacy with both hands. Maybe I held on too long. Maybe I thought love would be enough to keep the roof from sagging. The worst part wasn't losing money. It was losing my place in the story. The room had gone still. Not peaceful, just emptied out. That's when I knew. This wouldn't end with a conversation or a handshake. It wouldn't be fixed by guilt or apology. It needed structure, boundaries, a blueprint. I stood up slowly, joints stiff from the cold, turned off the shop light and let the garage door creak closed behind me. Ryan had made his choices. Now it was time I made mine. Friday morning, I booked the boardroom at the community center. Neutral ground, public building. No kitchen table tension, no emotional terrain. Just clean walls, plastic chairs, and a long oak conference table under flickering fluorescent lights. I told Ryan and Greg we'd be finalizing family legacy documents. Told them I wanted their input before making things official. Ryan texted back, "Glad you're finally being open about it." Greg's helped a lot. That told me all I needed to know. He was still under. Greg called me Richard in his response, like we were equals, old colleagues, not the man whose trust he'd been gutting like a fish. I booked it for 2 hours, invited Ingrid to join, not just as my lawyer, but as a witness, a notary, and a firewall. And then I made 2 more calls. Tom and Lou, both served with me back in the day, both retired, both sharp. We'd played poker every 3rd Thursday for 20 years. They'd seen me through Maria's passing, and they knew how to read a man's character in under a minute. I didn't tell them everything, just said I needed them there. Quiet support, no drama. They showed up in pressed shirts and quiet shoes, carrying thermoses like it was just another community meeting. I laid out the folders on the table, trust amendments, transaction records, the photocopied check, the revoked POA papers, everything Ingrid had pulled. Every page had a story, and every story ended with Greg's fingerprints. By 11:55, I was sitting at the head of the table, Ingrid beside me, Tom and Lou at opposite ends, looking like nothing more than quiet old men, with nowhere better to be. At 12:03, Greg strolled in, blazer, no tie, confident stride, that same syrup smile. Ryan followed, slower, eyes darting. I stood and offered a firm handshake, just enough to throw off Greg's rhythm. "Gentlemen," I said, "let's talk legacy." I could see it, the flicker of calculation behind Greg's eyes. He thought he was walking into a victory lap. He didn't realize I'd built the room around him, and I'd already locked the doors, with paper, with facts, and with people who wouldn't blink. The room held its breath. The only sound was the overhead light, buzzing faintly, flickering just enough to remind you time was passing. Greg sauntered to his seat like a man arriving late to a party thrown in his honor. Ryan followed but stayed quiet, eyes fixed on the floor, like a kid dragged into the principal's office without knowing what he did. I didn't say a word at first, let the silence stretch long enough to become uncomfortable. Greg tried to fill it. "Well, this is a nice surprise," he said, smiling toward Ingrid. "You must be the lawyer. Good to see Richard's bringing in professionals now." Ingrid didn't return the smile, just clicked her pen once and adjusted the folder in front of her. Tom gave a polite nod. Lou took a sip from his thermos, slow and deliberate. I stayed standing. "I called this meeting," I said calmly, "because I've been doing some reading." Greg opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "Quiet. Me first. I've been reviewing the trust," I continued. "My estate. My grandchildren's future." I let the word "my" hang in the air, sharp as a nail. And I noticed some odd activity. Payments, amendments, names added that I never authorized. Greg's face twitched, barely. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "Ryan's been trying to manage things." "I'm not talking to Ryan. That shut him up." I turned to my son. "Ryan, I want you to sit and listen. No one's accusing. Yet. But you need to understand what's been happening and what's at stake." Ryan swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing like it wanted to escape. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'm listening." I laid my hand on the stack of documents. "Then let's start with a consulting fee and work our way up." Greg leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, the posture of a man who still thought this was salvageable. A negotiation. But he was wrong. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a reckoning. And for once, I wasn't the one doing the forgiving. I began slowly. Not angry, not rushed, just steady. First, I slid the bank statement across the table, the one showing the $8,000 transfer to Cedar Integrated Solutions. Highlighted. Dated. Signed. Ryan blinked. "Wait, this is from our shared utilities account." "Correct," I said. "The one I kept open so the lights didn't go out if something ever happened to me." He looked at Greg, confused. Greg stayed still, poker face intact. Then I pulled out the Cedar brochure. Slid that across too. Greg's business, I said. Real estate mentorship. Self-funded legacy building. No certifications. No licenses. Just buzzwords. Ryan didn't touch it, just stared. Next came the trust file. Ingrid took over there. This is the education trust for the grandchildren. Richard established it 5 years ago. Here's the original structure. Single trustee. Him. She flipped the page. 6 months ago, a document was filed adding a co-trustee. Gregory Danner. Ryan looked up sharply. That can't be right. It's signed under your name, Ingrid said, tapping the page. Filed using a power of attorney you activated while your father was recovering from surgery. Ryan's face drained of color. Greg said it was just to make things more flexible. I didn't think. No, I said. You didn't. Greg opened his mouth to speak. Ingrid didn't let him. She slapped a notarized revocation down on the table. As of this morning, your role as co-trustee has been revoked. Permanently. Power of attorney terminated. Access locked. Greg's mask cracked. This is outrageous, he barked. You don't have cause for any of this. I've done nothing illegal. You're right, Ingrid said calmly. Not yet, but you've misrepresented your role, inserted yourself into someone else's financial ecosystem, and accessed funds not allocated to you. She leaned in, voice cool as steel. That's fraud, Mr. Danner, and we're not done. Ryan looked between us, between the man he'd trusted and the father he'd dismissed. His mouth opened, then closed. And I saw it, that flicker of realization, the moment the ground shifts beneath your feet and you realize you've been standing on someone else's lie. Greg's charm cracked like old paint. He leaned forward, voice low, almost snarling. This is ridiculous. You can't just cancel legal agreements because your feelings are hurt. Ingrid didn't flinch. Feelings have nothing to do with it. Fraud does. He turned to Ryan, grasping for ground. Tell them. You know I only helped. I was guiding you. Ryan didn't speak, just stared at the paperwork like it might burn a hole in the table. Greg pushed harder. Come on. We had a plan. You said you wanted your kids to grow up with something real. I helped make that happen. Ryan finally looked up. His voice was small, cracked. You told me it was just paperwork. That my dad knew. Greg scoffed. He's sentimental. He'd have come around. No, Ryan said, more firmly this time. You used me. Greg stood, hands on the table. This whole family is built on pride and control. I gave you a way forward. You're throwing it away because I said, sit down. I cut in, calm as winter. Greg froze. You walked into my house, my legacy, my family, and thought I wouldn't notice. Thought you could carve out a seat at the table with a pen and a title. I stepped closer, voice even. But here's the thing about tables, Greg. You don't get to sit at one unless someone pulls out the chair. And I never did. Ingrid stood too. A formal complaint is being filed with the state by end of day. Your access to any associated funds has been terminated. Further activity will be considered criminal. Greg's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Tom cleared his throat from the end of the table. Time for you to go, son. Lou nodded. Leave what isn't yours. Greg looked at Ryan one last time, but Ryan didn't look back. He just sat there, smaller than I'd seen him in years, like the little boy who used to hide behind my legs when things got loud. He mouthed something, 2 words I hadn't heard in a long time. I didn't know, and for once I believed him, but that didn't mean I'd forget. Greg didn't slam the door. He didn't shout. He just left. But silence can be louder than rage when it walks out wearing a cracked mask. I watched him go. The click of his shoes on tile. The stiff spine of a man who thought he had the upper hand, right up until it was yanked out from under him. Ingrid stayed behind to file the fraud report. It would be sent to the appropriate agencies within the hour, flagged, notarized, with attachments. Ryan stood like his bones were made of regret. He didn't say much, just nodded when I told him we were done for the day. When he left, he didn't even take his folder, just walked out empty-handed. And maybe that's exactly what he needed to feel. Tom clapped a hand on my shoulder as he passed. "You never stop being the man of the house," he said, voice quiet. Lou gave me a single nod. "Tight work," he muttered. "Didn't even need to raise your voice." They left like they'd come, silent, loyal, steady, and I was alone again at the long table. Except this time, the air didn't feel so heavy. I gathered the papers slowly. Every page was a battle Greg never saw coming. Every document a shield I'd forged while he was busy crafting speeches and power plays. I'd won something back today. Not just the trust fund, not just my legal control, but my place. For years I'd been shrinking inside my own legacy, making space for younger voices, for the sake of peace. Letting things slide because they mean well, or they're just trying their best. But peace without respect isn't peace. It's surrender in a quieter uniform. As I stepped outside, the sun caught the windshield of Greg's car disappearing down the hill. He didn't look back. Didn't matter. Because I wasn't chasing anymore. I was holding the ground now, and anyone who came for what I built, they'd have to come through the front door, not sneak in the back with forms and flattery. By Monday morning, it was official. Ingrid was appointed sole trustee of the education fund. No more shared control. No more loopholes. Every disbursement would now require her approval and full documentation. Airtight and on paper. Ryan's access? Revoked. Greg's name? Removed entirely. The trust, at its core, had been meant for hope, for opportunity, for protection. But I'd let it go unguarded too long, thinking goodwill could serve as a gate. Now, it was locked down tight. Ingrid drafted the amendment herself. Future disbursements subject to financial counseling certification. Ryan would have to complete a verified program, pass it, before he could petition for any further access. It wasn't punishment. It was accountability. He needed to learn what I learned the hard way. Money doesn't just test people, it reveals them. As for Greg, the investigation had begun. Ingrid filed the report just like she said she would, to the State Financial Oversight Board, the County Fraud Division, and even the Licensing Bureau for Consultants. Whether they pursued charges would depend on the paper trail, but he'd already lost the thing men like him hate most, access. I sat on my back porch that evening, coffee in hand, the air just starting to cool from the late summer sun. The same chair Maria used to sit in, her knees tucked up as she read mystery novels and watched the wind mess with the dogwood branches. She'd always said boundaries protect love. Without them, you're just begging to be taken. I used to think she meant physical boundaries. Now I understood she meant the kind you draw with your spine. Ryan hadn't called yet. Not since the boardroom. Part of me wanted him to. Part of me hoped he'd sit in that silence and feel the weight of what it took to clean up the mess he helped make. Even if he didn't mean to. I didn't need him to apologize, but I needed him to see the cost. Because love isn't a free pass. It's a responsibility. And from now on, mine was to the future, not to the ones who used the past as a door key.